Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Burk, horse specialist with University of Maryland Extension, and today I'm going to teach you about how to assess hay quality so that you can match different types of hays to the different types of horses that you are feeding. So what is hay? Hay is a grass like orchardgrass or a legume like alfalfa that's grown in a field. It's cut, it's then dried in the field. It's rigged into windrows so that it can be baled, like in this case, this round bale. And then we store it later so that we can pull it out, as in this case, we pulled out a flake of hay so we can feed it to the horse in the stall. Forage is really important in a horse's diet, and our forages that we feed to horses are usually pasture and hay. And hay in particular is a great fiber source for a horse. And fiber, as in a human diet, same as in a horse diet, is really important for normal digestive health. So we recommend hay to be fed at a minimum of 1% of their body weight, but most of the time it's going to be in the 2, maybe even 2.5% of their body weight. So if you have a horse that's, say, 1,000 pounds, that would be about 10 to 20 pounds of hay fed to them a day. We feed hay at different times of the year, and certainly in the Mid-Atlantic when we have 4 distinct seasons. We have to feed hay in the winter when pasture isn't available. And then also in the summer, many times we have a drought situation where we have to buy hay and ship it in, which can cost a lot of money, but that's just the reality of living in this area. There are other types of times where we need to feed hay, like when a horse is confined to a stall, or maybe when we have them in a loafing lot because of a rain event or inclement weather. And then also when we put horses on trailers and we transport them for long periods of time, we also offer hay in a net. This situation here is a little different in that we offer hay to control the diet. And in this particular horse, he's overweight and he can't be let out on pasture because that's too high in energy. So we need to bring in a low energy, more mature, lower quality hay so that this guy won't gain any more weight. So in the Mid-Atlantic area, we have maybe really 3 main types of hays that you're going to feed. Timothy is probably the most popular. It's a very palatable, highly nutritious hay to feed to horses. And one of the ways that you can tell that you have Timothy is when it does become more mature, it has a very distinct cylindrical seed head, as in the picture shown here. Another type of hay that you might feed to your horse in this area is orchardgrass hay. Also very highly palatable. Horses really like it. It has kind of this turquoise hue, in my opinion, kind of a little bluish in color. Seed head's a little different than Timothy in that it has these loosely clustered seed heads. So it's a little different when you see it in your hay. And it pairs very well with alfalfa. So you might find an orchardgrass alfalfa mixed hay. Speaking of alfalfa, that is a very common legume species that we feed here as hay to horses. And like I said, it's a legume, and legumes are typically higher in nutritional quality than, say, grass hays like Timothy and orchardgrass. And alfalfa is no different. You're going to find that it's higher in energy, higher in protein, higher in calcium, higher in most vitamins and minerals. And that means that you really don't need to feed it to most of the horses that you have. It's really too rich for most of our horses. So typically alfalfa is fed maybe as a supplement, maybe a flake in the morning, flake in the afternoon, or maybe you'll find it in a mixed hay for a high performance horse, like a 3-day event horse. All right, I want to review steps of making hay, just so you can kind of gather an appreciation for how it may affect hay quality, as we're going to talk about that in just a second. So the first step really is that a field of, say, orchardgrass is allowed to grow. They come in there with a mower and mow it. That grass lays on the field and it's exposed to sunlight and dries. And then sometimes you may find a tedder comes in to turn it over so that you can allow what was wet on the bottom to be now exposed to the sunlight. They'll go ahead and put it back in windrows using a rake and then bring in a baler to bale it in either square bales or maybe round bales. And then we're going to store it. Storage is very important. We need to store it in a well-ventilated area that's out of exposure of, say, rain or snow or any kind of inclement weather. So the 2 main ways that you're going to predict hay quality are, one, through visual assessment, which is pretty easy. You're going to look at the hay, touch the hay, smell the hay. Definitely the most inexpensive way. And then chemical analysis, which is more accurate, but you're going to find that you're going to pay more money for it. But maybe both are what work for your management. Okay, so the number one factor when determining hay quality is the stage of maturity at harvest. So think back to the slide where we're cutting the hay. The grass is allowed to grow from a vegetative, eventually to a reproduction type stage where it's taller. So the stemmier the hay, the lower the quality. So I'm going to show that to you in a chart here. So what you see on this chart is an orchardgrass plant, and initially it's very short, and then it grows up taller and taller and taller. And with that change in the height and also the maturity, you're going to find a change in the nutrients. So the first line here is that solid line, that's dry matter, or you could think of it as the yield that you'll get when you cut that pasture for hay. The taller the plant, the more yield, which is good in the sense that you'd have more hay to feed, but if it's of low quality, probably not the best. If you look at the broken line, that's fiber. As the plant gets taller and taller and taller, fiber increases. And think of fiber as something that is quite filling. So the horse will actually become full before it actually meets its nutrient requirements on a really high fiber hay. It's the same for you and me as if we were to eat popcorn. You get full pretty fast, but when you think about it, you didn't get a lot of nutrition through eating that popcorn. If you look down to the dotted line, that's non-structural carbohydrates. It's a fancy word for sugars and starches. That starts to increase as the plant grows, but you'll notice about heading stage, it also declines. And then the next line is protein, again, increasing as the plant grows and then declines after the heading stage. And then our last nutrient here, or compound really, is lignin. Lignin is an indigestible part of the plant. It provides the structure to the plant, and it's going to keep growing along with fiber as the plant grows and grows and gets stemmier and stemmier. So you can see here as the plant matures, nutrient quality will decline after the heading stage. The ideal time to cut orchardgrass is really before it heads out. So if you buy a hay and it's green and leafy, no seed heads, probably more on the immature side, higher nutritional quality, versus when you buy hay with full seed heads. It's a good time now to talk about cuttings, because a lot of people buy hay based on cutting. I want a first cut Timothy, or I want a second cut Timothy. And cutting is important, except the quality can vary based on the cutting. So what is cutting? Cutting is actually the number assigned to that time that the hayfield was cut, meaning the first time the hayfield was cut in the growing season, that's called the first cut. Then that grass is allowed to rest and regrow. You come in, cut it again, that's the second cut. So normally I think people associate the first cut with poor quality. Doesn't always mean that. However, getting the equipment out to get that first cut done is often difficult because it's a wetter season in the Mid-Atlantic. So yes, a lot of times our first cut is allowed to grow more and more mature before we can get out there and get it cut. Also, that field's been sitting over the winter, so you're going to find that you might have more weed content in first cutting hay. Having said that, sometimes a first cut might be a better quality than a second cut, depending on the conditions when it was made. Leafiness is factor number 2, which really goes along with stage of maturity. You want a soft, leafy hay, and that's because the leaf contains most of the nutritional content, so most of the vitamins, most of the minerals, and the protein. Versus, say, the hay on the right here is very stemmy. It's a pretty mature Timothy, and if you would feel it, it might even be coarse to the touch. So leafy is a higher quality compared to stemmy, which is a lower quality. Factor number 3 is color. So I'll repeat that again. It's not number 1, it's actually factor number 3 is the color. Most people think that because a hay is bright green, it's the best, and that's not entirely true. Certainly, bright green does indicate that it was probably cut at the right maturity, or a lesser maturity. It was cured properly or quickly, and it was baled at a lower moisture. And then hopefully it was stored well. So yes, in general, green is good, right? But that's not always the case. Really depends on the stage of maturity. So in this picture, you're seeing a golden yellow hay, and usually there are 2 reasons why you might have a golden yellow hay. The first is because it was just simply too mature when they got out there to cut it. It's probably got, full seed heads in it. it's going to be of lower nutritional quality. The second example, though, is a little different. It's just that maybe that hay that was initially green was put up in a storage area that was exposed to sunlight, and the sun came in and bleached the outer edges that it was exposed to. But if you open it up, it's green, it's of good nutritional quality. And then the last kind of set of colors that you really want to avoid when you're feeding hay to horses is brown and black. Brown and black can indicate a couple things. The first is that it possibly was rain damaged. So after it was cut and it was laying out in the field drying, maybe a rainstorm came through or a couple days of rain. And even though it was dried and baled, the nutrients leached out and the leaves are going to turn brown in that case. So it'd be a lower nutritional quality. Also, you might have hay that's baled too wet. We try to get hay that dries in the 15 to 18% moisture range before we bale it. But sometimes you get above that, maybe more than 20%. And when it's stored, that wetness causes some heat to be produced. And then you might have, mold spores created. So you really just want to avoid any sort of brown or black hay because it's usually going to be lower nutritional quality and possibly toxic to your horse. Factor 4 is odor. It is probably one of the primary reasons that horses reject hay is because of the smell. So it's a good idea for you to get in there and smell it, and it should smell like a freshly mowed field, that sweet grass kind of smell. If you smell it and it's dusty or musty, that's something that you want to avoid feeding to your horse, especially if your horse has allergies or any respiratory problems. Foreign objects or foreign material are things you want to avoid in hay, which seems kind of odd, like, well, what would be foreign in my hay? Dirt and dust certainly might be something that could reduce nutritional quality, but weeds, straw, corn stalks, those types of things just are a waste of money. Actually, you've paid for all of that, but they're also going to lower nutritional quality. And then the things that we worry about the most, mold spores, toxic plants or poisonous plants, wire, glass. You kind of wonder, how do those things get in there? But if you have a hay field that's along a road and someone driving by throws a bottle out into the hay field and that gets incorporated into the hay, you can kind of easily see in that example how you'd have a foreign material in your hay. Lastly, if you're feeding alfalfa, be a little wary about blister beetles. They carry a component in them that's toxic to horses. So anytime you're feeding alfalfa, make sure you're getting a source that isn't contaminated with blister beetles. All right, so those are the factors that are going to affect hay quality as we visually assess hay. It's also a good idea to get a chemical assessment. I mentioned it's expensive. It might run you somewhere between $18 and upwards of $60+. But it is a good idea to get it done because it gives you a much more accurate assessment of the nutritional content. So, for best results, make sure you get a representative sample, and there are plenty of online resources that you can use to understand how to do that. But it really just means you're going to have to buy or borrow a hay core, which is a long rod with teeth at the end that you put onto your drill, and you drill it into different hay samples, maybe 15, 20 bales that you have from one lot. You're going to take all those hay cores samples that you got, mix them up, and send it to a certified forage testing laboratory. And then you're going to get your results. And your results will tell you a lot about your hay. So it's a really good idea to go ahead and get take your results into maybe the feed store or sit down with a nutritionist and get them to help you understand the hay analysis. One thing I want to mention is, sometimes you just can't get good quality hay. You're really only going to be able to purchase low quality hay. And in those situations, it's okay, but you're probably going to have to supplement your horse's diet with some things that are higher quality. So maybe you need to go out to the feed store and buy some alfalfa cubes or compressed alfalfa bales and supplement your horse that way. You may want to think about purchasing a forage balancer, which are normally pelleted products that are fed in very small amounts, maybe 1 pound or less, that have low energy but high crude protein, high vitamin, high mineral to kind of balance out what your hay is not supplying to your horse. The other thing is you could consider a concentrate, which we commonly call grain for horses, but it's a balanced feed that is formulated for horses that you can give normally in about 4 pound amounts or more during the day to meet your horse's nutritional requirements. All right, So let's take what we've learned and apply it here. So we're going to try to match our hay quality to our horse's needs. Before you do that, though, you're going to need to kind of understand what your horse is doing, because that affects what type of hay that you're going to feed to your horse. So what I've done here is I've listed out horses with different physiological states or classes, and how it relates to their digestible energy and crude protein needs. So you'll see here horses at the bottom, or horses at maintenance. Those are the horses that are pasture pets. They're not really doing very much, and they don't really have high nutritional requirements. So they're low on the digestible energy and the crude protein needs per se. But then if you look up, horses after that, like a mare in late gestation, she has increasing nutritional requirements. You're going to need to feed her hay that's higher quality. Getting into the exercising horses, again, higher quality hay. Maybe not the best, but middle quality. And then if you look, the young, intensely exercised horses and horses in early lactation with foals by their side that are producing gallons and gallons of milk, they're going to have a very high nutritional requirement, and they're going to need a good quality hay. So you can kind of match that hay quality to the type of horse you have. Now let's take a look at some hay samples to practice matching hay quality to the horse's nutritional needs. Okay, the first two hay samples I have out here are both pretty mature hays. The sample I have here on the left is a mature Timothy hay, pretty obvious to see there by the cylindrical seed head. And then the hay sample on the right here is an Orchardgrass sample that I have very mature. Both are first cutting. And one of the things you'll notice about this is, actually both of them, it's that they're both very stemmy. There's not a lot of leaf matter in these two samples. But the other thing you'll notice about this Timothy is that it is very golden yellow in color. And we talked about the fact that, color is not the main determinant of hay quality, but certainly this hay was cut at a very mature stage and is lower quality. So that makes me think that maybe this hay is of higher quality because it's more bright green. But actually, I went ahead and sent these off for a chemical analysis. And what you'll notice is that they're actually quite similar in their chemical analysis. So the chemical analysis tells you a lot of things, and I just have pulled out a few things. One of them is the digestible energy, and you'll notice they're very similar in digestible energy, fairly low for digestible energy as well. NDF is really indicative of the fiber fraction of the hay, and they're pretty high in fiber, about mid 60s to high 60s, 60% for fiber. Crude proteins on the low end, typically we don't want to feed a horse anything less than 8% crude protein, and these are just slightly above that. Calcium to phosphorus are pretty low in these hays, 0.35% to 0.24% for the mature Orchardgrass. And then the last value here is the relative feed value. Relative feed value is an assigned number given to the hays from the lab, and they're comparing a mid-mature alfalfa, which is 100. So these hays being 81 and 77 are a lower quality than a mid-mature alfalfa. So as far as feeding these hays, what horse I'd feed them to, certainly a horse that's at maintenance, that's a pasture pet that isn't doing very much, could be fed these hays. Maybe even a horse that's overweight and you would want to feed a lower energy hay. But the thing to keep in mind is that because these are so high in fiber, you'd also have to add a forage balancer in there that would provide more crude protein and more vitamins and minerals to meet those horses' energy demands. All right, the next two hay samples I have out here are both examples of Orchardgrass, and they're both second cuttings. And if you look at the hays, you'll notice that you can't see any seed heads, which means that when these hays were cut, they were very immature and hadn't gotten into their reproductive stages yet, which is a good sign for hay quality. And then if you explore a little further and test the leafiness, they're both really soft and leafy. So again, good quality hays. Moving on to color, you'll notice right off the bat that this is a very bright green hay, and this is not. This hay is brown. There are some black parts to it. Probably was rain damaged in storage or baled wet, and this has a very strong smell of mold, and I would not feed this to any horse in my barn. So we're going to focus on this one over here and look at its nutrient content. We have a slightly higher digestible energy than we did in our mature hays, a little lower in the fiber fraction, so we're still in the high 50s. Crude proteins a little bit higher than our mature hays. We're now around 11%, which is pretty acceptable for most horses. Calcium to phosphorus is increased a little bit, and the relative feed value of this particular hay is actually comparable to a mid-mature alfalfa, which is telling me that this is a very high quality hay. I can feed it to many horses. I could feed it to maybe a horse that is a little thin that needs to gain weight, perhaps exercising horses and competitive horses, and certainly brood mares that are in their earlier mid-gestation. Okay, the two hay samples I have out here are really the ones that are the highest nutritional quality. So on the left, we see an Orchardgrass with some alfalfa in it. Let me pull out the alfalfa here. There we go, a little bit of alfalfa, there we go. So this is a field with Orchardgrass mixed in with alfalfa, and this came from a straight alfalfa field here, and you can tell it's a little stemmy, so it's probably a little bit more mature when it was cut than this hay. But both are very high quality hays. If you look at the leafiness here, we can see this is a leafier hay because it has the Orchardgrass in it, and this is a little bit more stemmy. If we go ahead and look at color, the color is a little bit darker here due to the Orchardgrass, and certainly they're both bright green hays, which tells me they were cut and rapidly cured and baled and stored properly, so that's good. So let's go ahead and take a look at our nutritional quality through chemical analysis. And you'll notice here with the mixed Orchardgrass alfalfa that it's a little higher actually in energy content than our alfalfa. Certainly both are lower in fiber than our other mature hays that we showed a little earlier, and our crude protein has come up. This sample here is about 17% crude protein, which is actually slightly higher than what most horses really need, versus this one, which is 21%. And so this sample is actually a higher, has a higher crude protein level than what most horses require. If we look at calcium to phosphorus, we're pretty comparable in calcium to phosphorus, except this really does have a little bit more calcium, and that's pretty typical for an alfalfa. We like to use alfalfa as a calcium supplement with some of our horses on low calcium diets. And then moving on to our relative feed value, actually the alfalfa comes in at a higher relative feed value than this Orchardgrass alfalfa, but both are very high quality hays. So as far as what type of horse I would feed these hays to, I think this one is a hay that would be used in special circumstances for horses that need to gain weight. I would definitely feed this hay to an intensely exercised horse like a 3-day event horse or a race horse or a barrel racer, and then certainly a broodmare in late gestation and an early lactation. So this is a great hay for a horse that's really doing a lot of work. Now, alfalfa is a wonderful hay source as well, except that it's really more nutrient dense than what most horses need. So I would probably just use this as a supplement for horses. Maybe a racehorse, for instance, would get one flake of this, but it would not be fed all of this alfalfa. Alfalfa is great just prior to foaling and after foaling for mares in early lactation. But again, this is a little bit more than what most horses require. But two examples of good quality hays here. So in summary, hay is a great source of fiber for a horse. It provides almost all the nutrients they need to meet their requirements. However, hay quality varies quite a bit. So you're going to have to be knowledgeable in assessing hay quality either through visual means or through chemical means. Remember, if you're looking at hay, stage of maturity and leafiness are the two most important factors that will help you determine hay quality. And lastly, sometimes when you have to feed a lower quality hay, just remember that you have to supplement your horse with either a good alfalfa or maybe a forage balance or a concentrate to help meet those horses' nutritional needs. Thank you.